Waking up, I figured it'd be a normal day just like all the rest. The twins were asleep, Andrew was getting ready for work, just like a normal day at the Roberts household. As I headed towards the stairs, I went up to the boys' room to take them downstairs for breakfast. When I smiled and peeked into the room, I noticed they were not trying to get out of their beds, and it was quiet. I thought. Must be downstairs, I hoped as I came out of the room, unlocked the gate, and made my way downstairs. Jack, buddy, over here! Andrew smiled, took a spoonful of rice cereal, and looked towards Jake. Okay, here comes the airplane! Andrew giggled as I watched him shove the spoonful of cereal into his mouth. Morning! I smiled, moved and kissed Andrew, looking at the boys. You're brave feeding them in your work uniform, I smiled. Yeah, well, I was already dressed and someone was hungry. He smiled and kissed Jack. You still hungry, buddy? He asked and tried to feed him more. Must be full. I smiled and reached for a wet rag to wash them off. Taking the rag, I went for both of their faces and cleaned them off. Taking the rag, I threw it in the sink and went for some eggs in the fridge to scramble them in the microwave. After I finished, I came over and sat next to Andrew and the boys. You have to leave soon, don't you? I sighed with a slight pouty lip on my face. Yes, but I'll be home faster than you know, he smiled and kissed me and got up. I have to get my shoes and get going, he sighed, as he headed into the living room to find his work shoes. Honey, where? Andrew stopped as I cut him off. By the door, babe. I smiled and pulled Jake from his high chair and took him into the living room to put him in the playpen, and then coming back for Jack. As I put Jack in the playpen, I moved to go kiss Andrew. See you after work. Love you. I smiled and locked the door after him. As I watched the boys play and then fall asleep, I had the TV on. I watched a few morning news shows and then made bottles for the boys as they woke up from their naps. As I got up, I put them in their swings and gave them their bottles. The boys, now one, usually ate a lot, but today Jack would not take his bottle. And soon after Jake finished his, Jack began to cry. Picking him up, I tried to calm him and rock him back and forth. Didn't work. I then tried putting him in the swing to calm him. Didn't work. I then tried to feed him again, but he wouldn't take it. Andrew fed them this morning, so I'm not sure how much he ate, which worried me. My next move was to take the boys in the car. Picking them both up, I went out to the garage to my van and helped them into their car seats, getting in and pulling out to drive around. When the boys were babies, this helped so much. When Andrew used to be clothing checker, I would drop him off at work and come back at 10:45 to drive around the lot to put them to sleep. Right now, that was not working. Nothing I had tried was making him stop crying. I was at my wit's end. Jack was bright red from crying, and I could tell something was going on. Driving around the lot, I pulled out my phone and dialed a few people. All were busy. I finally tried Andrew's mother. Thank God she was home and would gladly take Jake. As I stayed on the phone, I told her I was at Albertsons. I had to stay in the circle of driving the outside of the lot. She sighed and agreed to meet me there. As I drove around, I saw her car and continued around to meet her at her car. I put the car in park, not turning it off, and helped Jake out of the car to his Grandma Harriet's car. Thanks so much, Harriet, I sighed. She smiled and gave me a big hug. Keep me updated. Sighed, hoping Jack would hopefully get better. As I waved and kissed my son goodbye, I got back in the van and drove around a few more times, so I couldn't take it anymore. I tried to give Jack his bottle, but he refused. I felt his head, and he was a little warm. I figured I'd go inside and get some baby Tylenol to see if that helped. Parking, I got out and picked up Jack and put him on my shoulder, letting him rest his head. Shh, I cooed as I walked and headed into the store, making my way to the cold and flu section. Finding what I needed, I headed quickly up to self-checkout and bought the Tylenol. Heading into the bathroom, I set him on the changing table and opened the package, giving him the recommended dosage for his age. Cradling him in my arms, I came out and began to stroll around the store. As I came up on the front of aisle 5, near the Jell-O, Andrew had spotted us as he was checking. I was trying to be discreet as not to disturb him, but it was now or never. Coming up, I looked down at Jack, his face red and wet with tears. My face was also wet from crying with him. Quickly finishing his order, Andrew pulled me in as I held Jack. Shh, shh, he cooed at us. You okay? He asked. I stood there and began to let it all out, crying. Jack's been crying nonstop for like an hour, and I tried everything. I felt more tearful as I could see people around looking at us. She okay? Rod mouthed. He was doing media on check stand 1. Andrew looked at him and shook his head no. I wanted so much to pick up and hold Jack, so I did, despite the fact I was still working. Holding him over my shoulder, I rocked him back and forth. Just then I got an order. What was I to do? My son was still crying, but slowly, and I mean slowly, calming down. I could feel it. As I held him, I smiled at my customer and picked up the phone. Hold on a sec, I sighed and told my customer. Reed, service first to check stand 5, I called and held tightly to Jack. Reed quickly arrived and began to bag as I checked. Slowly but surely we finished 2 orders with a sleeping baby on my shoulder. He was still hot, and I knew something was up, but I needed to keep him there. I would be done with my shift in 20 minutes. Rod came over and looked at us. I was red, Jack was red, and the back of Andrew's uniform shirt was wet from Jack tears. Sighing, I looked at Rod as the next customer left and one was filling the belt. I know I'm breaking about a million rules, but I gotta do this. I sighed again. Jack was asleep by now. Rod glanced around and everything looked fine. As long as nothing goes wrong, then you should be fine, he explained. I stood there having finished the order, rocking him slowly back and forth. Where's Jake? Andrew asked, looking at me. Your mother, I sighed, standing next to Andrew, being an extra hand if he needed it. If this continues, I think we need to head to the ER, Andrew explained, having finished and thanked me about Jake. I agreed and watched Andrew work with our son on his shoulder. I set the diaper bag on the check stand near the phone. Digging in it, I pulled out his bottle, which was a bit warm, so I put it with the sodas to hopefully cool it down. Maybe having something cold would help him. As I pulled it out, it was definitely cold. As the little boy looked up, I gave it to him, and he took it and began to down it. As another customer showed up, Andrew had started singing.
I won't give up on us, even if the skies get rough. I'm giving you all my love. I'm still
Jack took the bottle and rested his head, drinking from it, relaxing on his father's shoulders. Oh my, I smiled. He's finally taking his bottle. I felt a sigh of relief, knowing my son was taking in some liquid. Andrew let out a smile and kissed his son. That's my boy! He chuckled slightly as I stood and watched. I hoped that Jack wouldn't throw up. Andrew didn't need to throw up on his back for the last 5 minutes of his shift. Don't rock him too hard, I sighed. Don't need him to throw up, I added as I watched them. It was like my heart melted. Andrew and I had been married 3 years, been together 5, and the twins born a year ago. I knew he'd be good with kids, but this moment right here summed it all up. He was perfect. Looking at the clock, it was 3. I looked at Andrew as he rang up the items. Babe, it's 3. I smiled slightly. Andrew grabbed the phone and called the office where Rod was sitting. Can I close up? Andrew asked. Oh yeah, go ahead, Rod said. We are taking Jack to see the doctor, so I'll text you and keep you informed. All right, Rod noted and hung up. Reaching up, I turned off Andrew's light and took his close sign to close him off. We needed to get out of here. As he finished, and we all made our way to the time clock, I watched as Andrew pulled his badge off and swiped it. Just as he finished, I saw Jack's face turn green. All that he had just drank came flying out and onto the floor, some of it landing on Andrew's back. As I moved away, I looked at Andrew's face. All I could see in it was a look of disgust. He was definitely grossed out. As I turned, I went for the phone and hit page. Code 100 in front of the time clock, I called and then hung up. Don't move, babe. I'll help you with your shirt, I explained, and came up to unbutton it and slide it off his back, wrapping it up so that it wouldn't trip. Don't move back either. I don't want you to trip, I explained as I noted that it was pretty slippery. Hey, Morgs. Andrew smiled as he watched one of the baggers, Morgan, walk over with the Exorb to clean the floor off. Jack had quieted down, but when he threw up, it started all over. That's when I knew we needed to get to the ER. Something's wrong, I sighed, looking at Andrew. I watched and waited, then helped him out of the mess. still holding onto his shirt. Andrew held tightly onto Jack as we slowly made it outside. "Shall we try to put him in his car seat, or do you want to hold him?" I asked. Andrew sighed and thought about it. "I know that holding him would keep him happy, but I don't want something to happen to us on the way there," Andrew explained and set Jack in his car seat. The kid was still crying. We had tried everything, but nothing was working. "Jack, baby boy, let me finish, okay?" he sighed. "We will be there soon," he sighed, trying to reassure his son, who was not wanting to have anything to do with him. Finishing the buckles on the car seat, Andrew got in and sat next to him as I got in the driver's seat and pulled out of the lot, heading down the small hill and turning right towards the hospital. Jack's face was red, and he was still crying, not as bad as before, but something was obviously hurting him. As we pulled up, Andrew got out and picked up Jack, letting him rest his head on his shoulder. As he rushed in, Andrew tried not to shake his son around. Didn't work too well, because as they stopped and Andrew began to talk to the lady at the desk, Jack threw up again all over Andrew and his shirtless self. "Okay, let's get this kid back to exam room 1, the nurse motioned and asked him to explain what was going on. "Well, Jack here hasn't been eating as much as his twin, and as per my wife, he has been crying for at least an hour now. We tried to feed him his bottle again, and he took it the second time, but minutes later he threw it up," Andrew explained. "And he feels like he has a fever," he added. The nurse looked at Andrew and listened to what he had to say, making a mental note so she could write it down later. "Is he allergic to anything?" she asked. "Not that I know of, but he's got Down syndrome," he sighed, and I held tightly to Jack. There was no way he'd be able to put him down. As I held him, the ER nurse came over to change him into a child's gown and take his temperature. As she pulled the probe from his underarm, she looked at it. Jack definitely had a temperature. "Sir, if you don't mind, I'm going to need to give him a central line. I don't know how he will react, so what I want to do is put him under. That will keep him from squirming, and I can get done what I need to do," she smiled. "I'll be giving him some meds for the fever and also some fluids," she added. Andrew nodded and cradled Jack in his arms so she could put him out. He still had no shirt on from it being removed at work. Holding Jack tight, I watched as the anesthesiologist took the mask and placed it on his face. In a matter of minutes he was out, and the nurse was giving him a central IV line. As I sat there with him in my arms, the nurse said the doctor would be in soon. As I sat with him in my arms, I smiled as Ruth came in and sat next to me. "Well, he's got a central line for fluids and fever medication. Doctor should be here soon. Sounds like they want to do an MRI and a CAT scan." Andrew sighed and paused. He held Jack and moved closer to me, taking his one arm and pulling it in. I could tell something was going wrong. The last time I saw him cry was when we found out Jack had Down syndrome. He wasn't hurt or mad by any means. He was more scared for everything. For me, for him, for us, scared for our son. As we sat there, Andrew pulled me in and cried. I tried my darndest to be strong. This hurt me. For one, seeing my son in pain, and seeing my husband cry. Right now, it felt like he was letting it all out. Since me and Jack had already cried, it was his turn. I sighed and held them both close. As I pulled tight, I pulled out my singing voice and began to sing.
Well, I won't give up on us, even if the skies get rough. I'm giving